I'd like to welcome everybody to the 25th of November Police Services Board meeting. If I could ask everybody to take their seat. Yeah, including the chief. I'd like to start off with the confirmation of the agenda. And I'm looking for the board's approval to add one item to the in-camera agenda regarding legal indemnification. Is this carried? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the confirmation of minutes. Minutes number 13 of the 28th of October 2019 and minutes 14 of the 6th of November. That the Ottawa Police Services Board confirm minutes number 13 and 14 of the 28th of October 2019 and 06th of November meetings. Is this carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Committee meetings, reports from committee chairs and minutes. On November the 14th, the Finance and Audit Committee met, which I chair, and we discussed the draft Ottawa Police 2020 operating and capital budgets. We received a presentation from staff and heard from public delegates. The budget is before the board this evening for consideration. So from that we have that the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this received? Thank you. Are there any inquiries? Seeing none. The first item of business is the Chief's verbal report, which we'll hold. The next item is the 2020 Police Services Board meeting schedule. That the Ottawa Police Services Board approve the 2020 meeting schedule. Is this carried? Yes. Thank you. Number 3 is the appointment of special constables to OC Transpo. That the Ottawa Police Services Board approve the appointments of OC Transpo employees listed in Document 1 as special constables pursuant to Section 53 of the Police Services Act in accordance with the terms and conditions set forth in the attached approval of appointment forms. Is this approved? Yes.
Mr. Chair, is this done on an annual basis? And if so, does it have to be done? It seems the next one we have one individual that's being, or two individuals. Does it have to be done on a regular basis, or can we do it for a 5-year period, or who has the information for that?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, they are done for a period of time. So these are done as they expire for each member.
So is the term set by the province?
Term sets by the PSA.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next item is the reappointment of special constables OC Transpo. That the Ottawa Police Services Board approve the reappointment of OC Transpo employees Daniel Gauthier and Sarah Kennedy as special constables pursuant to Section 53 of the Police Services Act in accordance with the terms and conditions set forth in the attached approval of appointments form. Is this carried? Thank you. Number 5 is the 2020 draft operating capital budgets. We have delegations and a presentation on this, so no presentation, just delegation, so we'll hold this one. Number 6 is the OPS response to the diversity audit and traffic stop race data collection report, which we do have a presentation on, and we have a member of the audience that wishes to speak, so we'll hold that. Number 7 is the financial status report, third quarter 2019, that the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is this report received? Received. Thank you. Number 8 is the performance report, third quarter 2019, that the Ottawa Police Service Board received this report for information. Is this received? Thank you. Number 9, the report on SIU investigation, that the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Is it received? Received. Thank you. Number 10 is the workforce management report, third quarter 2019, that the Ottawa Police Services Board approved the appointment of the sworn officers identified in Document 2 and received this report for information. Is this approved and received? Thank you. Number 11 is the interoperable mobile communications managed service. And you may note on this one that And I'll just read from the report. All actionable and technical issues have now been addressed and resolved, and this report represents the last IMCMS update report to the board. Is this report received? Thank you. Number 12 is outstanding board inquiries and motions, November 2019. That the Ottawa Police Services Board receive this report for information. Is it received? Thank you. Number 13, letters of commendation. That the Ottawa Police Services Board receive this report for information. Is this received? Thank you. Now we'll go back to the first held item, which is the Chief's verbal report. Chief, who's gone again?
Thank you, Chair. Board members, appreciate the opportunity to address you and through you to the audience. Let me just load up the glasses here. Good evening, bonsoir. I know we've had a very busy agenda today, so I'll try to keep my comments brief. I would like to start off, Chair, by embarrassing you a little bit and congratulating you on being selected for the Order of Ottawa, which recognizes exceptional people here in the city who have made a significant contribution to making life better for everyone who lives here. While we've only been working together for a few months, I've seen those qualities on display on a regular basis, and I know that you've earned this recognition. It's a prestigious award, well-deserved. Congratulations on behalf of all the men and women of the Ottawa Police Service.
I'm humbled. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, I've been sanctioned twice already by the chair for being tardy and not getting to my seat in time. But I will say that that award ceremony was not only inspiring, but it started on time and finished on time and allowed it a great time for us to meet with these members and for me to meet with many of the great Ottawa residents. I was grateful for that. It's a great introduction to this great city. Thank you. Transition. Over the past month, I've been fully immersed in the operations of the service and meeting our frontline members, both sworn and civilian, as well as many of the folks in the Ottawa community. I still have not yet reached the farthest western and eastern limits of the realm, but I'm doing my best to get out there and looking forward to meeting everyone across this great city. The passion that I've seen experienced inside and outside the organization has confirmed for me that my decision to come to Ottawa was the right one. I want to thank everyone for their ongoing efforts to welcome myself, as well as my family and I, to the city. I'm grateful to the executive team and the senior officers who've been working hard to bring me up to speed on the many issues that we're facing, as well as the many opportunities that we can better leverage. The contact I've had, particularly with the frontline members and the residents, has been very illuminating in shaping my insights as well as my plans for the future. There is still, no doubt, a lot of work to do and many more issues for me to get my head around, but I know we've got the right people and the right level of enthusiasm to take on these challenges and to advance these opportunities. Right out the gate, we were hit with two major reports, many years in the making. Last Wednesday, we released two independent reports that we commissioned to continue our leadership work on equity, diversity, and inclusion. The diversity audit was prepared by the audit team from Greybridge Malcolm, and the traffic stop race data collection report was prepared by the Ontario Technical York team. I just want to acknowledge Inspector Flanagan in the room, who led phase one of the race data collection report. Very successful and very difficult implementation. I'm grateful for his leadership and his support going forward. These reports and presentations are also now available on our website for the public who have not yet had a chance to fully review them. There will also be a short presentation by my team this evening about our commitment to moving forward from the recommendations to action. Both reports demonstrate progress, and both conclude that we have work to do on this journey towards professional and equitable policing. The reports contain difficult findings, but they also contain opportunities to address systemic barriers, which will help us to make policing better for everyone, the community and our members. I think we all know that bias, racial profiling, and other forms of discrimination exist in society, and that means that they exist in policing and in this organization as well. These are not easy issues to face in any profession. I think, however, there has been an over-focus on our frontline officers and members, and their supposed unwillingness or inability to implement bias-neutral practices and to hold themselves to account and to maintain a level of professionalism and discipline. That has not been my experience in policing, in my previous organization, or in my short tenure as chief of the Ottawa Police Service. I have spoken to many of our frontline officers. I've worked with them, albeit in short spurts, on patrol over the last month, and I know they're committed to this work, individually and collectively. They support a change in our approach that brings in more innovative thinking to address these issues. They also need to know that they have my support, the support of my executive and the senior officers, and the support of the community. And by support, I mean not a blank check. Being held to the highest level of accountability and expectations, being reasonable in responding to constructive criticisms, and understanding that there is a fierce urgency right now to improve. That this isn't something that we can kick the can down the road on, that we need to make measurable, demonstrable, and continuous progress on. But they want that support, they need that support to do this heavy work. And I think we've got the right people, both inside the organization and outside, to provide that support. Ultimately, this is an organizational issue that we need to address. It's our own systems that select these officers. It's our own systems that train them and evaluate them, and it is our own systems that deploy them into the community to conduct operations. If there's any failure, it is at the organizational or systemic level, rather than indicative of any deficit for the individual officer. I will hold myself first and foremost to account on moving this issue forward. It'll be myself and this executive team that works hard, first and foremost, to advance these issues. I know that we'll have the effort from our internal members on this, and I know we already have through the CEC and other invested stakeholders, some of whom are in the room here today, to make sure we advance this cause. Many institutions and sectors are doing this work to improve their systems, including policies, procedures, and training and development models, to name but a few. Again, I'm confident that the OPS has been and will continue to be a national leader in this important work, and it shows much courage in terms of what we're doing within the Canadian policing ranks. I am proud to be a member of this organization as we continue to make advancements. In the coming days, we'll begin developing an action plan that will be led by Deputy Chief Uday Jaswal, in concert with our community members and our members across the organization, and I expect to release that report in January 2020. This plan and the change it will bring is as much to help the community as it is to assist our members to do their jobs and to serve our community in the most effective way possible. Together, we'll make more meaningful progress on EDI by removing barriers and improving our systems. It's about creating a police service that both our community and our members deserve. The next opportunity to contribute is at the annual Human Rights Learning Forum on December 4th, 2019. There's limited space, but there is still space available for those of you that would like to attend and contribute. I'd like to thank the Diversity Audit Team, the Ontario Tech York team, as well as the leadership of Deputy Chief Uday Jaswal and the many members within the organization and many community members who've contributed to our work so far in these two important areas. I want to just turn briefly now to gun violence and community safety. I want to discuss some of the gun violence that's affecting our community over the last little while. On the good news, our investigators have solved all 12 homicides that have occurred this year in Ottawa, and our frontline officers are effectively investigating and incarcerating armed and violent offenders. This includes the work of our pivot officers who made a routine traffic stop that led to the discovery of illegal drugs, a loaded .45 caliber handgun, and other acts of crime earlier this month. So far, year to date, we've seized 62 crime guns. Just last week, we saw a targeted shooting at a West End gym that left a man in very serious condition in the hospital. It was Ottawa's 68th shooting of 2019, and it is a sobering reminder that we need to continue to do our work with our partners and keep the focus on street and gun violence within the city, and most importantly, addressing its root causes. For the good of everyone in our city, we must work hard to prevent these types of incidents from occurring, and that prevention can only come from a coordinated effort and a whole-of-community, multi-sectoral solution. In other words, we must do this work together. I've asked Deputy Chief Bell to begin working with the city and our community partners to develop a more comprehensive approach to reduce street-level violence, as well as to increase community safety and well-being. And quite frankly, this effort that the Deputy is leading on our behalf should be something that sets a milestone across this country and certainly establishes the Ottawa Police as one of the foremost agencies advancing the new Police Service Act requirements of community safety and well-being. I'm encouraged to see that we have a mayor, a city council, city general managers, leaders across our civil society and within the NGO sector that will allow this to happen. And I'm very confident in the leadership of Deputy Chief Bell to marshal those resources. We will be helping to marshal those resources, but we're not intending to lead that parade unless it's a requirement for us to do. There are many great leading agencies and many great leaders within this community, We'll be part of that parade, sometimes at the front, sometimes in the middle, always moving things forward. The development of that strategy is only in its early stages, and I expect to have more information by the next board meeting. It will require the support of the community, the board, and several levels of government, but we know that this is required, needed, and can get done. We all want the same thing, a safe and healthy community where we can put down roots, raise our families, and start good businesses and contribute to society. This type of gun violence runs counter to all of that goal, and we're committed to reducing that and limiting it as much as possible. I want to conclude my remarks by talking about the great work of our frontline members, particularly our frontline officers. One of the best parts of this job is hearing about the great work being done by our members. Having gone on a couple of patrols already, I'm continually impressed by their compassion and professionalism. In this month's commendations report, which I hope everyone has had a chance to read, and for those members of the audience, please do visit the website and have a full read of the commendations. A resident wrote in to tell us how one of our officers saved her daughter's life. Her daughter had been sexually assaulted and had emotionally broken down. No one had been able to reach her, but the patience and compassion of Constable Jesse Hewitt hit home with her. The mother wrote us to say that she's starting to see a difference in her daughter because of Constable Hewitt's kindness, that he took the time to sit and talk with her daughter and then get her to the hospital and even gave her his phone number if she needed to talk. Those simple acts of kindness have now made this young lady feel safe enough to go outside again. The mother wrote, and I quote, "Constable Hewitt is not just another officer. He saved my daughter's life. For that, he will always be a hero to me and my family." Another resident wrote us after witnessing our officers attending a suicidal woman on a bridge. They remarked how patient they were and how they consoled the woman. While one officer remained on the ground to catch her if she jumped, the officers The mother wrote us to say catch her if she jumped. Sorry, bit of a missing quote here. Anyway, she writes, "The officers truly represent the best of our police service." And that's only two examples of things that happen that you don't hear about, but they do leave a lasting impact on somebody's life. I am constantly approached by residents in this city who are eager to share their exceptional experiences they've had with Ottawa Police Service members. In fact, Mayor, at the Community Awards ceremony, I was approached by a woman who pulled me aside to thank me for the care that an officer gave her during a routine domestic dispute call. Neighbors had called the police after there had been a loud argument between her and her husband. The couple had just had a new baby who was experiencing a lot of significant medical issues. The couple was extremely exhausted and were not coping well. Our officer sat down with the pair and helped to calm them both down. The officer could have left after de-escalating the situation, but he took the time to stay and help the couple figure out why they were arguing to begin with. The woman was grateful for the patience and kindness of our officers and his ability to help her and her husband work through some of their issues. She told me that it has actually changed their relationship and that they're now doing much better as a family. Again, it's a reminder that kindness does matter, that professionalism and compassion matter, and that everything we do as police officers has an impact each and every day. Finally, I am looking forward to the change of command ceremony tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it for a number of reasons. It is a chance for my staff to stop planning activities and get down to their basic work. It is a chance for me to deliver one final rah-rah speech and focus on the work of being a police chief. It is a chance for me to honor retired Chief Charles Bordelot and his family for their contributions and sacrifices to this city. It is a chance to praise the amazing work of our current serving members and the work of decades and decades of former members. It is a chance to celebrate this amazing city which I'm getting to know. With that, that concludes my verbal report, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have for me.
Thank you very much. Do any of the board members have any questions that would like to have the chief? Yes, Member Meehan.
Chief Slowly, thank you for those remarks. You said that all 12 of the homicides have been solved. Just before you said that, you said there was 63 crime, and I missed the end of that sentence.
Crime guns, I believe.
63 crimes committed with a gun.
Yeah, 68 shootings, 62 crime guns seized year to date.
And can we compare that to last year?
Ask Deputy Chief Jaswal to respond. We are down in terms of shootings year to date. The percentage is relatively small, and I'm not willing to spike a football on that year-to-date stat, but we're trending in the right direction. I'll get some more definitive words from Deputy Jaswal.
Thank you.
In terms of the shootings, as the chief said, that is down from last year. It's still too high for our liking, and obviously we're working on a number of strategies to address that. In terms of the guns seized, it's about on par with previous years.
Okay. We're not seeing any more guns, though, out there. Do we know, and anecdotally, because we're trying to stop the importation of these handguns, a lot of them illegal. Any work on that with Border Services?
I'm going to ask Superintendent Renwick just to comment on that.
Chair, the number of guns, it's still a concern. Any crime guns, and by crime guns, we define them as guns that are out there illegally and are being used for criminal purposes. Our number of seized crime guns are about the same. We know that importation and to a lesser extent conversion of once legal guns to crime guns is still occurring. The number of shootings is really indicative of how many guns are out there, and we are slightly down, about 7% from this time last year, but it's still an issue. There's still one crime gun out there is too many because of the public safety, and we have numerous efforts underway to address the crime
Maybe this
rates.
question is unfair. Do we know how many guns are confiscated at the border, like coming in?
The borders, it is a border with the U.S. We do know that there's certain border points that are used. None of them are in our jurisdiction, but with our counterparts with the provincial police, we are aware. The seizures coming across borders are much higher than they have been in the past. We know that handguns are coming in from
Because
the
we're trying
US.
to get them to enhance enforcement at the border. That's, we've stemmed that river that's coming in with illegal.
That's one of the strategies, provincial strategies, particularly led by the OPP and their provincial weapons enforcement unit.
So
yes.
maybe that's reaping some benefits then.
It is, but there's more work to do.
Yeah.
We're still seeing those guns showing up in our communities.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'd also add to that Superintendent Renwick and I had a meeting very recently with Canada Border Services, specifically around that issue and how we can partner better to address the influx of guns from the United States. So there is work underway around that issue.
Thank you. Member Blaustein?
Thank you for that report. On the same track as Member Meehan, what are we looking at as far as violent knife events? Because it seems to me, maybe it's my imagination, that we're experiencing more and more violent crime using knives as opposed to using guns. And I'm just wondering, am I correct in that we are increasing that? And it's much harder to control, obviously, because some knives are illegal, but most are not. So is there any strategies that we're looking at for that?
I actually asked the same question of my command team very recently as I saw what seemed to be a trend line. I'm going to ask Deputy Chief Bell to speak to that. Just by way of small clarification, the knife itself is not illegal. It's the intention of what we're going to do with it, but small deviation. I'll ask the deputy to speak to it.
So one of the focuses that we have is around street and gun violence, so that we are actually taking into account the violence that we're seeing around knives and knife attacks. As the chief spoke about, we're looking at developing our strategies in certain areas where we're seeing a higher number of knife attacks or gun violence, and that's the work that we're having to make sure that within the communities that we are going to put our resources in, that we're aligning with the community safety and well-being plan, and looking specifically at focusing on how we decrease street and gun violence in those neighborhoods. So you're absolutely right. It is an area of concern for us and one that we're looking on focusing on moving ahead.
Are there any other questions? If not, then on the Chief's verbal report that the Ottawa Police Services Board received this report for information. Received? Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 5, which is 2020 draft operating and capital budgets. We have public delegations, and it'll be up for approval after. So each of the public delegations will be given up to 5 minutes to speak, and I'll call you up in the order that you've been registered. I would also note that we've received 2 written submissions, which have been included under communications in the agenda. So the first speaker, The first speaker is Yasna Jennings, and she will be the Executive Director of the Byward Market, BIA, and she is also presenting for Nathalie Carrier, the Executive Director of the Vanier BIA. So essentially, Yasna will be giving us 2 presentations, so she has twice as much time. Thank you.
Am I on? Okay. Okay. First, I think I'll start with my colleague Natalie's presentation from Vanier BIA, Quartier Vanier. Mr. Mayor, esteemed members of the Ottawa Police Services Board, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today through my colleague Yasna Jennings of the Byward Market BIA. I apologize that I could not be here to address you in person. I am addressing you today as a representative of the vibrant Vanier community and specifically its business community. As BIAs, we do much more than manage banners and benches on our main streets. We are often frontline workers and observers of the challenges our communities face: poverty, social issues like housing and homelessness, and of course, crime. I would like to commend you on the return of the community policing model in Vanier. In the few short weeks that this program has returned to Vanier, Sergeant Wayne Stangl and his team have begun to restore hope to our community in this fight against crime that we face every single day. You all know the reality of Vanier and Overbrook. You see it on the news, and we live it every day. There are shootings in our family restaurants at 4 p.m. on a school day. Our Tim Hortons has had to change their bathroom light to blue so drug users can't find veins. Our MPP, MP, and the businesswoman who owns the building that houses their constituency offices regularly find needles or condoms on their front stoop, and I could go on. On October 21st, 2019, after years of numerous attempts and desperate requests, our community policing team was reinstated. Here we all were, the many stakeholders of our community, united in one room with a shiny new policing team, and we all had the common goal of restoring order in Vanier. In the few short weeks that our neighborhood resource team has been in place, we have seen tremendous leaps in the right direction. We held a focus group with our merchants 2 weeks ago, and one recurring theme and goal emerged as single most important thing to tackle: presence, consistent and continued police presence on our streets. Presence ensures that troublemakers are recognized, that there is consistency in reporting, that links are made by officers between different crimes, and that people feel safe by the very nature of seeing officers present. There is a saying, cockroaches scatter in the light. For too long, Vanier was left in the darkness. The light you are now shining through the NRT is both essential and important. I'm happy to highlight that 1 month to the day of the official return of this program, our NRT proved the theory. Last week, a hit and run occurred on Montreal Road. The driver was unlicensed, uninsured, and had previous indictments. Within 30 minutes of the accident, our NRT located the suspect hiding in a bus shelter. They quickly took him into custody. The community policing model works. The statistics presented here by my colleagues prove it. We see the struggles some of our colleagues and BIAs like Rideau Street and Byward face every day. This model works, and I would encourage you to renew your commitment to our NRT and to restore these teams to other BIAs as well. Thank you. So that's from Natalie.
Will you be able to answer questions on her behalf, or should we just move into yours?
Well, I guess it would depend on what the questions are. This just got forwarded to me about an hour or so ago. So.
Are there any questions for the presenter? No? Okay, you can launch in here. Thank you.
All right. So, hello. Your Worship, Chief, Ottawa Police Services board members, on behalf of the Byward Market BIA, our 600-plus members, as well as the Byward Market Safety and Security Committee, we would like to thank you for allowing us to take this opportunity to provide comments on the 2020 OPS budget, but more specifically on community policing. My name is Yasna Jennings. I'm the Executive Director of the Byward Market BIA. I have held this position since spring 2006. In that time, I have seen and been closely involved with a variety of police models and initiatives deployed in the Byward Market. There really is no place like the Byward Market. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it is always filled with activity. We are the historic heart of the city, home to one of Canada's oldest and longest running farmers markets. We are the city's #1 tourist district. The Byward Market hosts on average over 7 million tourists a year. From May to October, or commonly known in tourism speak, from tulips to leaves, we see an average of 50,000 visitors every weekend. The Ottawa Letters alone attract approximately 100,000 visits every month in that same time frame. In 4 square blocks, we have over 150 restaurants and cafes. We have 25 entertainment venues and nightclubs, 2 international hotel chains and 1 inn. And now, as we've all just recently learned, over 1,100 Airbnb units within and surrounding our district, and a new LRT stop. Add to that over 100 shops, dozens of health and beauty outlets, 2 national museums, international embassies and organizations, including the U.S. Embassy and the Agacon Foundation, and well over 100 more professional services and offices. Add to this hectic mix, within our boundaries and just outside of our doorstep, are 3 major men's shelters, 3 supervised consumption sites, and dozens of drop-in and social services. With all of this activity and convergence, one would assume that there are dedicated officers that patrol these 4 square blocks every day, all day, 365 days per year. But you'd be wrong. The safety and security of both our visitors and members is one of our primary objectives. Over the years, we have prided ourselves on our outstanding record of safety. This success was achieved through the combined work and close relationships developed with our dedicated NHOs, foot patrols, and beat officers. Their regular presence and their direct interactions with our office and our members were our greatest asset in terms of addressing our challenging and diverse safety and security needs. As senior management of OPS strive to cut costs and find fiscal and internal efficiencies, much to everyone's surprise, this successful model was axed. Members regularly bemoan the loss of the officer that gave me a cell number to call if there were any issues. I often hear, "What happened to the officer I used to chat with all the time? What happened to the officers that used to wave at me in my shop as they walked by?" Why was this successful model disbanded? Well, it seems statistics, and particularly calls for service and charges laid, didn't support the grander scheme of finances and corporate planning. But at the end, how do you quantify what didn't happen? Let's hope this works. That's how you quantify what didn't happen. As they say, a picture paints 1,000 words. The chart before you is comprised of annual statistics recorded from tulips to leaves dating back to 2005 and includes 2019 data. All the gains that we achieved from 06 and 07 and moving forward were achieved through proactive efforts, through knowledge-based decisions based on the expertise of the area provided by dedicated officers who were in the know. From dedicated officers who knew who was who knew how to deal with different individuals, how to talk them down from a crisis, what their history was, whether that was criminal or social or medical. All of this needs to be valued and measured, which in turn shows its invaluable worth. This spring, the Byward Market saw 2 very tragic incidences occur within a short time frame of each other. They garnered lots of media and community attention. In a reactive decision, additional officers were assigned to patrol the area primarily on Friday and Saturday nights to deal with nighttime challenges. This added presence was welcomed by both members and patrons on a Friday and Saturday night. But the Byward Market is much more than Friday and Saturday night. The market is bustling 7 days a week from morning to night. We need a return of dedicated officers all day, every day. From 11 a.m. to approximately 8 p.m., we need the regular presence of dedicated foot patrol who regularly and proactively interact with business members and visitors. We need assistance with the nuisance issues that plague our streets all day long. aggressive panhandling, open drug dealing, nuisance behaviors, thefts from vehicles and businesses. These were all stats that didn't happen when we had the NHOs. They weren't qualified or quantified before, but now they are. Our members are very clear on how to move forward, even if we're going a little bit backwards. We need to get back to community policing. We need to get back our dedicated daily foot patrols in the Byward Market and get back to the business of working closely and in lockstep with the community that you are here to serve. Oh, I think I lost my last page.
Are you?
I will
I was
share
just
with
going to
that.
say your 5 minutes is up.
I will
so.
share with that
Okay.
that all of that work came through nurtured, fostered relationships, and we saw great success, and I think the numbers prove that.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Jennings. Are there any questions of the delegation? Yes, Member Meehan.
Hi, Yasna. So is this today an appeal that you would like one of the pilot projects that's been rolled out in other communities to be in the Byward Market right now? Are you disappointed that you weren't identified as an area where this was going to be reinstated?
We certainly were disappointed, and I think, like I say, the stats prove that we desperately need that regular presence. If you looked at my phone right now, my cell phone is filled with numbers with officers over the years, and really it was a quick point of contact. We're having some issues on this corner with this person today, what have you. And there were people there to deal with it immediately. It wasn't an email that got passed down a chain. Things were dealt with immediately. And again, the members felt it right away. Visitors love it when they see police out there. They're taking their pictures with them. We need that presence, and we need the dedicated officers that know who's who, because there is a wide cast of characters, and that familiarity is key.
You know that the pilot projects we're trying to get things absolutely right before they're put into other neighborhoods. Is that good enough for you? I mean, it will eventually come?
I can say, as of this point, right now, if we saw 2 guys walking that beat 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 o'clock at night, it would make a huge difference. We understand this is a huge organization. There's a lot of moving parts, but in this immediate, I can almost guarantee that we're going to be back to this bottom line if we see 2 guys every day, all day.
Thank you. I think that's pretty clear. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Member Valiquet.
I would just like to say that I've known Yasna for many years, and I share in your pain because when I was executive director at the Vanier BIA, we lived these problems together and we worked together, and we were very successful back then when you show your numbers. I'd also like if you wouldn't mind just talking briefly about your ambassador program, because that to me shows real initiative from a business community that took on as much as you can. You have one of the best ambassador programs, certainly in this city. I don't know about others across Canada that are similar to this one, but I know firsthand how well you orchestrate that ambassador program. And I think for the benefit of the audience and for our police officers that are here today, could you briefly describe to us what is the ambassador program and why did you bring it about?
Sure. So it certainly predates my arrival, but we have dedicated students, and if possible, we try to hire from either social services programs, from criminal studies programs, people who might have an interest in this kind of stuff, and they walk the streets of the market every single day, and they are a first response for a variety of things. They deal with anything from aggressive panhandling to first aid situations. If they see a situation that is really escalating, they're our first, they're kind of our first responders, if you will, right on the scene. They can call police for help. This program has been incredibly successful, and we work very, very closely with police and Police Services Board. Police Services Board has traditionally supported the program financially, and we certainly appreciate that. But I think at this point in time, and what we experienced this summer, is that we are in a situation where this program's success was really based on the partnership with police and the knowledge that, sorry for the cliche, but that police had our backs. And this year we had a couple of instances where we really didn't have any backup. And we have 19-year-old little girls and boys out there trying to manage what really are issues for police to be managing. And after, well over 15 years of success, this year we really struggled with our ambassadors. And this is why we really need that presence, and we really need that dedicated, those dedicated officers down there to help, because the program was intended to stop calls for service. So again, we're almost victims of our success in stopping some of the calls for service. It doesn't necessarily reflect in calls for service on the planning side for police. Does that work?
Thank you. Are there any more questions? If not, then I'll thank you for coming and speaking to us twice. And,
thank you.
Our next speaker is...
Sorry, would you mind if we just responded to the presentation? Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Deputy Chief Bell to speak shortly. First of all, just grateful that you managed to do 2 presentations, and I recognize the first one was just handed to you, and I'm grateful for the insights, particularly in terms of the positive feedback by Sergeant Stengel. I understand from Deputy Chief Bell that he has been one of the architects of this renewed approach to neighborhood policing. And I'm grateful to hear that feedback about our frontline officers, particularly their supervisor. I also recognize that these are words that you were reading and not necessarily ones that you'd created, and I may have read something wrong into it, but I just want to state for the record, our officers in this service will always see any resident or any person who frequents an area of the city as a human being first. And that if we are able to put more dedicated resources in any capacity into any community, the view of our officers will be to see people through a harm reduction wellness lens, and not through the lens of a light shining on a cockroach. I know that's not what was meant, but I want to be clear to the community here that we view all of the people in this city as human beings first, and we'll do our best to serve and protect them regardless of where and how we find them in the circumstances when we deliver police services. I am grateful to see Councillor Mathieu Fleury here, and we've had a number of discussions around how to better support these very complex series of neighbourhoods. Vanier, which has an investment already, but could be up for further investments should the supply-demand side meet, and certainly we're having ongoing discussions right now around how to put more effective resources into the Byward Market area. I can't make any promises right now, except to say we're having a very healthy look, again being led by Deputy Chief Steve Bell. Let me just talk very quickly about the chart up there. I'm always interested to see how we can measure the negative, so that's a very encouraging stat. Crime prevention is based on our ability to make a compelling business case, and at least on its surface, that is a very compelling case. But some other important measures. Crime must go down whenever we put an investment of resources in, and trust must also go up, otherwise that crime reduction will ultimately turn around and be a failure. If we do put a neighbourhood resource team anywhere in the city, I also want to see other measures happening. A greater number of integrated services being delivered, not just by police, but by police in partnership with city resources and not-for-profit agencies. The co-production of a number of outcomes, including crime outcomes, safety outcomes, well-being outcomes, service outcomes, trust outcomes, and public value outcomes, all of which must be necessary in order for us to have any sense of true sustainable success in whatever investment we might make, wherever we might make it. Turn things over to Deputy Chief Bell to give us a brief update on what he can disclose right now.
So yes, thank you, Jasna. It was good to hear the stories about Vanier. We're glad that we're having a positive impact there. I think one of the things that's important to talk about is it's not just the police providing resources in that area. The city's been a great partner that's becoming engaged with us, and they've actually set up teams around a similar model. So we have social services, public health, Parks and Rec that are actually looking at how do we work together with community partners to better deliver service to make the community safer and more well. As we're going through the evaluation right now, data like this is fantastic, and I hope we can actually hook you up with our data people so we can share this and use this as one of the inputs for us. We've been through a journey of community policing that starts in 2017 when the public looked at how we changed our model as it relates to community policing and continually gave us feedback. Through that time, we've looked at how we deliver bikes and beats to specifically to the market area as well as other urban areas. We've looked at SRO augmentation in that area to have more presence. We've looked at the presence of the market initiatives where we have during the most vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable hours, more resources put in that areas. But we hear you. There needs to be, we need to make sure that as we're considering where we dedicate resources moving ahead, that the uniqueness of the market, the jewel that the market is for our city, is considered when we look at putting boots on the ground into communities, in the Byward market and in the Lower Town area. So I look forward to having more conversations with you, getting the data you have as we look at how we meet the needs of the uniqueness of the Byward market.
Thank you, Chief and Deputy Chief. That was, I think, very helpful. And thank you once again, Yasna. The next speaker is Laurie Miller, the Executive Director of the Preston Street BIA. Just have to push the button. There we go.
Mr. Mayor, Police Chief Sololi, honored members of the Police Board. My name's Laurie Meller. I'm the Executive Director of the Preston Street BIA. I've been doing this job for 18 years, and I've never had to come before this board in the past. But I'm here now because we're having real problems in Little Italy. For the past few years, we've seen an alarming increase in crime in the neighborhood. The bulk of the crimes have been smash and grabs, where a car's window is broken and any valuables in the car are stolen. Quite often, it's been our patrons who are the victims. Some of them tell us they're never coming back to Preston Street because it is no longer safe. Our businesses and apartment buildings are also being broken into repeatedly. Property owners have taken significant steps to create safety by design, but laundry rooms, locker rooms, restaurants, and cars are still being broken into regularly. Last week, our councillor held a community safety meeting, and Deputy Chief Bell was there. And many residents, as well as the business owners, expressed concern that they feel the neighborhood's no longer safe. You are there, Deputy Chief Bell. They told this group that they no longer feel that they are safe in their own neighborhood. Most felt that having police presence on the street would deter crime in the area. We've been in regular contact with our community police officer. She's fantastic, but she has had a real challenge getting resources because not enough police reports are being filed. She has walked through the area, putting the yellow cards on the dashboards, but the driver only sees that once they return to the car. And it's not preventing people from leaving things in their car. The BIA's advised all of our business members numerous times to file police reports, but many victims are not telling the business owners, so we don't know what's getting missed. Quite often the robbery happens at night, so the victim's in a dark street, and if they decide to report to the police, they call the non-emergency number and are usually told to file the report online. This discourages a lot of victims from reporting. Most people do not file reports unless they plan to put a claim into their insurance companies. The citizens of Ottawa do not understand that intelligence-led policing requires reports to be filed. They see no purpose in going to the effort of going online when they get home to file a report. This puts us in a position of not being able to get police resources assigned to our area. This is giving our membership the perception that the Ottawa Police do not care about our area. They are extremely frustrated as they watch the area that they have invested millions of dollars into over 40 years slip back into an unsafe and undesirable neighborhood. I'm here to ask for two things. The first is that the Ottawa Police create a public awareness campaign like the ones you do around Don't Leave Christmas Gifts in Your Car, explaining to the citizens how intelligence-led policing works and why it's so important to file a report. They don't know that that's the only way to get police to the neighborhood. And the second, sorry, suddenly dry mouth, is to allow victims to report incidents over the phone again. I think we're going to see a much higher number of reports if we will allow those reports to be taken over the phone. The other point is, when you can call and talk to the police about the crime that's just occurred, it gives you the impression that the police care. It's important to have that kind of empathy, that kind of response, to know that the police are there to serve us. That's all I needed to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the delegation? Yes, Member Valakay. Okay, any other questions from the members? I'm sure that our chief, I think, wants me. I noticed him furiously writing notes, so I'm gathering you'd like to respond.
I would, Member Valakay, did you have a question for me? And then after that, I'll respond.
I was wondering about the online reporting. Can you tell us if there's an increase or a decrease of people reporting crimes since we've gone online?
I'm going to ask somebody else to answer that question, but I will come back because I have thoughts on that. I'm not sure who's best positioned for that.
You have a question? Okay.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Were you saying that many of the car break-ins were because people had not locked their car, or are they smashing windows?
They're smashing windows.
So when they're leaving the yellow card, is that to say lock your car?
It's to say don't leave valuables in sight. And
I thought they had a
but it's
program
kind of
where
like closing the barn door after the horse is gone.
But I thought there was some program where you also check to see if a car is locked. Or am I mixing that up with another city? I remember seeing, is it Quebec does that? We don't do that, because I've heard, I know in residential areas, I remember I had a meeting on this about a year ago, and whole streets were being targeted, and it was over 60% of the people said they forgot to lock their car.
Right.
So that was, if we could do, I don't know if it's don't leave your valuables and lock your car, add it to the tag.
And file a report with the police.
Yeah, because, I'm not sure, I don't even know if the police are allowed to actually go and lock someone's car, and you may not want to because they've left their keys there, or what the circumstances are. So, okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. I'll just, high level, appreciate the comments. Reporting online, the challenge that I think every police agency is finding is how do we engage people both in the physical world, the traditional sense, an officer responding or being available in the neighborhood, as we talked about earlier, and leveraging different digital platforms, which different people like the convenience of. So it's not for everybody, but it is for some people. So I think you'll continue to see some type of service delivery model that includes the ability and the requirement to report online. It is also in the time of difficult resourcing that we look for efficiencies. That is one of those going forward. That said, I hear clearly that there is a level of extreme dissatisfaction and increased criminality that's occurring in the area, and so we need to consider that first and foremost before we move to a CRM type of approach. What I will say is the area that you are living in, and I've had some reports from my command team, is another one of those areas we need to carefully consider around the additional resources going in, for some of the reasons you talked about and for additional reasons. But again, not in a position right now to put forward anything concrete, except to say there's a very live discussion around looking at where our next series of significant investments will be. I'll turn things over to Deputy Chief Jaswal to talk a little bit more about the crime picture in there, and then I'll ask Steve Bell to follow up with some thoughts around the neighborhood policing side of things.
Thank you, and I'll speak first to your question around online reporting, and John's given me the latest in terms of the performance report that we just submitted. So reports received online grew by 25% in the third quarter, so that's 1,400 reports. I can tell you that the number of reports that we receive online through our police reporting unit are much more than we ever designed our system for. So when we think about the service initiative and the staffing of those units, how they were designed in terms of their functionality together, we're having a challenge managing the call volume. So we are working right now in terms of some review to look at shifting resources and better triaging some of those issues, so we have a better not only online reporting experience but also through our police reporting unit, because we do have significant waits at times for people who are trying to report online. So I think some of that criticism is quite valid, and we need to address that.
Can I just, before Deputy Chief Bell talks about sort of the operational side of things, I am going to take a healthy review of this still outstanding piece of business where you'll get resource depending on how many times people call in. While that can be a useful effort to a limited degree, that cannot be the main driver of police service delivery. So I share your concerns in that area, and you're not the only one voicing that concern. Members within our own organization have spoken about that is not the most effective way to win confidence and to respond to community needs. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you.
So from an operational perspective, first of all, I'd like to thank you for hosting that meeting with Councillor McKenney and the Community Health Centre. Those are the type of dialogues and discussions that we have to have. You live in a very eclectic, your BIA is in a very eclectic neighborhood that has its own unique sets of challenges. I went out the next day and I walked with Inspector Bryden, and we walked all of Preston Street. You have lovely merchants, there is absolutely no doubt. And they identified some areas. And as the chief said, as we go through our review, they were pretty vocal and pretty clear that you are an area, because of the eclectic nature of it, that we need to strongly consider when we are aligning or looking at where we're going to go with our next set of neighborhood resource teams. So from the walk, what we did identify some quick fixes for the area, but I would encourage you and your residents to continue to have that dialogue with the community police officer, so that when there's an emerging issue, we can respond to it right away while we consider where our next set of NRTs are going. So again, thank you for organizing those meetings. Those are vitally important to us.
Thank you, Member Meehan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about something that the Deputy Chief Uday Jaswal was saying. You said that the number of responses going into the call center has exceeded what the capacity is. Is this current budget, 2020 budget, able to address that? And some of the things that Deputy Chief Bell is talking about, some of the maybe service initiatives that could be undertaken for the BIA in the Byward Market and on Preston Street. Does this budget have the elasticity in the budget in order to address these issues? Because I'm hearing quite an urgent appeal today for help.
So I think absolutely some of the proactive measures that Deputy Bell is talking about will have an impact. One of the challenges is through the service initiative, we went to a very reactive model of policing. And I think you've heard some of that today in terms of losing some of the relationships, losing some of our ability to be well positioned within community to address some of these things in a very proactive way. And so what we've done is we've actually created a system that's fueled and driven on demand for service, so calls into the police service. And so part of the volume that we're experiencing is that reactive nature of the model that we adopted. So if we get back to the community policing model, I think that'll reduce some of the burden and the pressure. The other part is actually to look at the system as a whole and make sure that we actually are assigning resources appropriately and that we are assigning the right work tasks to each group. So I think there's some confusion right now around that piece that we need to review and correct.
But would it need an extra body, or do we need to upgrade our technology? Like, where are we looking at an expense here?
Well, I think there's, I don't want to speak to what the solutions are before we look at the review. I think there's an ability to fix some of those issues without adding staff, but likely we'll have to shift resources internally to better address the demands of those units, from the communication center to front desk services, to the police reporting unit, the alternative response unit. All those sections, we'll have to look at how that staffing is allocated.
And is that the same for you, Deputy Chief Bell? If you do implement something for the BIA, would it be within the current parameters of what our staffing is going to be, 30 new officers? Is that?
So it will be within the current growth plan. The plan is to look at how we're aligning our Bikes and Beats unit currently, as well as adding new resources to new neighborhood resource teams.
Maybe I'll just jump in a little on this. First of all, the elasticity of any budget, particularly policing budget, has to address driving community safety and crime issues. So the short answer is yes. We'll make it elastic enough to address whatever we happen to face, whether it's a weather disaster or a human-driven issue. Secondly, and I think to some degree it's been said by both deputies, if we deploy ourselves in a more proactive, prevention-focused way, then we should see a demand drop on our internal systems. We should see a demand drop in terms of the actual crime and public safety and wellness issues that our communities are facing. Neighborhood teams, I don't want to overuse that term or that particular intervention, but it is certainly one of those more evidence-based proven processes. But a number of other proactive measures will see us be able to drive down that type of demand and increase the satisfaction. Ultimately, that's the model that we're building our deployment against.
Yeah, I understand that, but I guess when I hear Yasna Jennings talk about, she read a letter from the Vanier BIA where the neighborhood policing works, and she's dealing with their own issues in the Byward Market BIA. I know that there's a desperation there to get something like that in the Byward Market, and we can't say within our budgeting for 2020 whether we can dedicate officers to the market, can we? It's going to have to be within the complement that we're looking at for 2020.
It may be reframing, and I don't mean to split hairs on an important issue. There are any number of places across the city that are experiencing what they would consider unreasonable levels of safety and crime and service issues. And so we have to be very, very careful in terms of assessing the full scope of pressures around specific resource deployments. I don't think anyone here is suggesting that we're going to wait 364 days before we make a decision on a deployment, but we're going to have to make sure that we are as informed as possible around decisions of scarce resources against increasing demands.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the... Well, thank you once again, and thank you, Chief and Deputies, for your... Our next speaker is Councillor Matthew Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ottawa Police Services Board members. Directors wanted to come and ask a few questions as it relates to the budget. I have three questions. So the first one is on page 14, and it really a specific question as it matters to the modernization roadmap, I guess what we call Bundle 4, and as part of this year's funding strategy, it's $4.4 million. My question is, as it relates maybe the specifics of what those efforts are. I've had issues in the past and concerns in the past, and you've heard from some of our speakers, including the Deputy Chief, as it relates to some of our changes in Ottawa Police Services where we had different teams, different efforts, and we saw how the modernization roadmap has impacted us directly in the past. So want to know what's planned for this year. What are we planning to do with that money? And would there be impact in terms of resources?
If I can just ask you to ask all three of your questions at once.
Sure.
That way,
absolutely.
What can happen is, otherwise you're chewing up your time during the responses. So if you ask all the questions, then we'll allow the staff to answer at the end.
The second one is more technical in nature, but just a better understanding of what is bottom-up build. There is on page 18 a graph, and it speaks to $9.9 million of bottom-up build, and it seems like an interesting terminology that I hadn't heard before, so wanted a bit of clarity on that. And then my third question is it encompasses a couple of things. So there's a really good summary of the efforts in between 2016 and 2019 as it relates to new FTEs, 105. But I sort of got lost in the analysis of the budget. I don't understand. There's numbers there for population growth, but I don't know where we should be. I know we're growing in population. I don't know what is the Ottawa Police Services goal as it relates to ratios, population to growth, and specifically on the future sworn positions. I think it's important to identify too the full change, because in some elements of the budget it speaks to the retirement, some of the changes in the structure. I think what we want as a community and as as leaders in our community is to understand how many more officers are on the road and how many more officers are working in community. So a bit of confusion in those graphs. And finally, as part of this, if we could just have a better understanding of the expectation for the neighborhood, the acronyms NRT, neighborhood resources teams, because it's clear, it says, well, it's not 24/7, but what is it meant to be? Because it's certainly not Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and I know that, but it's unclear as to what the goals are for those teams. So I don't know if you need me to go back and clarify any of those questions, I'm glad to, but here's the rapid fire.
So I'll let the chief determine whether he needs more toing and froing, but I'll turn it over to you to get the appropriate people to answer. Thank you.
Sure, problem. And I think I got 4, not 3 points, but we'll do our best. High level, there's nothing that isn't going to be reviewed significantly, and certainly nothing significant that isn't going to get reviewed. And that may sound like bafflegab, but modernization roadmap is a multi-million-dollar, multi-year investment that started long before I arrived and is scheduled to continue on long after I start my tenure here. It's a major capital investment, and I'm grateful for the city dollars that have gone into that, but I need to do a full review, and I've only just stuck my big toe into a big ocean. I will say that, again, it's not going to have to be a very long time before I get to a point that we can make some considered decisions around how to get a greater return on investment, both on what's already been spent and what's still unspent and in the queue to go. I'll queue up our CAO just to follow on my comments. From a bottom-up build, again, I'll rely on Jeff Letourneau to speak more, but essentially I would say it's bottom-up, outside in. And we want to make sure that from a ground level, our frontline members, we have a full understanding of the conditions they find themselves in, the challenges and opportunities around which a budget can alleviate. And from an outside-in perspective, what are our communities experiencing? And we've heard 2 excellent deputations already in terms of that outside-in approach. In terms of the number of officers, yes, again, grateful for a commitment of 30 sworn officers to be hired in. But in communication with the board chair and the board itself, what we want to do is make sure that we're making the appropriate business case year in and year out for the resources that we need, people, money, and time, in order to address the expectations and the realities within the city. I'm also making a number of efforts to leverage every possible dollar I can outside of the city budget. That includes provincial and potentially federal grants to allow us to increase our capacity here in the city of Ottawa. And I've mentioned a couple of those initiatives, one of which Deputy Chief Steve Bell is going to be leading on our behalf. And finally, I think you've asked a healthy question. What is neighborhood policing? The neighborhood resource teams are the current definition and standard for the Ottawa Police Service. It has been a different experience in the London Met over in the UK. It's been a different experience in the City of Toronto, in my former organization, and so far it has been a changing experience here in the City of Ottawa. I suspect it will change again before the year is out, because I will bring my own insights and interventions into a well-developed program so far. And I know the team is open-minded to, again, looking at evidence-based best practice and making sure that we continually improve on the definition and, more important, the implementation of that definition within community. Certainly one of the most exciting things I've seen, and Steve Bell referenced it earlier on, it's not just the injection of ring-fenced, dedicated resources from a police standpoint, but we now have ring-fenced and dedicated resources from a city standpoint in terms of social service workers. And I believe ultimately that is the more effective model, and one that will be unique and uniquely outperforming others here in the City of Ottawa. With all that said, I'm going to turn some of those budget questions back over to Jeff to comment on further.
Thank you, Chief. I'll just touch on the first 2 questions, and the Chief did do a pretty good job of answering them, but your first question related to Bundle 4 of the Modernization Roadmap. So that $4.4 million was the final tranche of funding that completed the funding of the $41.3 million roadmap as planned, as the Chief mentioned. We will be doing a review. The plan had been to complete some of the major projects, like the Frontline Mobility Project, which involved outfitting all of our officer vehicles, frontline vehicles, with a better in-car cabin design, the Information Management Program, and the Digital Evidence Management Program. Those are what was planned. However, as the Chief mentioned, the program will be going through a review. And the bottom-up build is just simply a process by which we gather information right down at the grassroots level and build it all up just to make sure we're capturing all of the requirements, all of the needs, all of the asks, and then we filter that down to hit our final budget number.
Maybe just to come back on one of the questions that I felt was sort of essential to this is you're presenting future FTEs and clarifying what those resources might need. But as a resident of Ottawa, when we compare ourselves to other cities, it's hard to understand the population versus the amount of officers. And again, I know you've just started, but is it possible in the future reporting of these measures to establish what would be a fair ratio for our city? Because when I look at it, it's very hard to know, first off, how many officers retired, how many do we need new, what's the package of new team members do you bring on, what's the actual capacity to do so within the same year? All those questions arise in my mind from that section in the budget.
A very healthy question. I'll be in the chair's guidance as to how much time he wants to dedicate to it. I will certainly say, first of all, the police to population metric is an important one, but not on its own substantive to understand what is the actual capacity for a police service to deliver adequate and effective policing in any community, small, medium, or large. Excuse me. An untimely tickle. I would also suggest crime severity index, which is a measure of our ability to keep crime down, particularly severe crime, is another important measure. Scary. If you look at police to population, the usual list of comparators aren't really great comparators. Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto are all cities that have a lower police to population ratio, but unlike this city, they're dense urban centers. When you get into the regions like Peel, Halton, Durham, York, I would suggest Ottawa is more like a region than it is like a dense city. Police to population actually has a differentiated outcome on effectiveness and adequacy of policing. So we need to look at a number of combination of measures before we say we're above or below where we should be. Ultimately, right now we have an inverse relationship. We're at one of the lower ends in terms of large cities, in quotes, for police to population, but we're actually one of the higher performing in terms of addressing crime severity. So even with a lower amount of police to population, thank you, we're actually doing better than most regions, similar sized and constructed around actually addressing crime. It comes back to the quality of our members and the quality of the community partners that they're working with. At the bottom line, after saying all of that, if we feel we need more resources, people, money, time to address the things that we've heard about here tonight, we'll make that case through the board to the city. Ultimately, though, I am going to review everything that we currently have to make sure we're operating at the most optimal way. The resources we have are deployed in the most effective way, and they're having the types of outcomes that actually make a difference to our members and to the members of the community that they serve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. Were there any questions from the members around the table for Councillor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next delegation is Councillor Ralston King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to see you again. It was quite a great honor for me last week to accompany you to the desk for you to receive your Order of Ottawa Award. Well deserved. And I felt very gratified as an attendee, first-time attendee to that ceremony to have accompanied you. So thank you so much for the work that you do. Before I ask my question, I just wanted to really relay that.
Thank you very much.
The question I have, it primarily deals with equity, diversity, and inclusion. I know that there were a series of reports, diversity audit and a traffic stop race data collection report that have been released, and there will be further community consultation around the findings of that report. But my question primarily is dealing with the FTE allocation. I just wanted to ask the police service and the chief, whether the two civilian FTEs that would be allocated to equity, diversity, and inclusion, the inclusion office, would be sufficient based on the work that might emerge from these reports. And the, I guess, subsequent question is maybe it's an encouragement to work with the new anti-racism secretariat that will be formed in the new year, ideally passed in the budget thanks to community members, some of them who are sitting behind me, councillors, and of course the mayor's office. We're very appreciative of the establishment of this office, and we're looking for ways to cross-pollinate and to share best practices and information. The community has emphasized that areas that are outside of the city's city service jurisdictions, such as policing and education, are of key concern. And so I was just curious to see whether those FTEs are efficient and what planning might be put in place to coordinate with the city's new anti-racism secretariat.
Thank you very much. Chief?
Thank you. We're grateful for the ability for us to staff the EDI unit with the two civilian FTEs that you talked about. Is it sufficient? Yes, in the first instance, it's net new, and so it creates a net new capability. We went from 0 to 2, and that's a big step in any organization where resources are fought over continuously. Is it sufficient in the long term? There's only a handful of police agencies that I'm aware of, stand to be corrected, by others that have made as significant investment. Most recently, my former organization has brought on, through board support, I think 5 FTEs for their organization. Again, if you're looking at comparative sizes, we're probably relatively similar in terms of investment made. One thing I do want to say, and just like our neighborhood resource teams are not where we get all of our community policing done, these 2 FTEs will be not where we get all of our EDI efforts done. I consider community policing the job of every single member of the Ottawa Police Service, and I believe that EDI is equally the job of every single member of the Ottawa Police Service. And like neighborhood officers, they will have a wide variety of internal and external stakeholders, city resources that we'll be tapping into. And to your second point, we will very much like to leverage existing city capabilities and experience and expertise to support and increase the capacity of these initial 2 permanent members of the team. I'll just ask sorry, I've done it twice to you, Deputy Chief Jaswell to comment further on our EDI strategy.
Thanks, Chief. Absolutely, as the Chief said, we're actually still developing the EDI office in terms of what the roles and responsibilities would be, from service delivery to coordination of service, and so a lot of the use of those FTEs would be based on that design. Inspector Paul Burnett, who's here, is actually leading that effort and leading that work around the design of that office, and so we will have more of an understanding as we move forward in the next few months of what that will look like. But as we've already had a chance to speak on the Anti-Racism Secretariat, we absolutely intend to leverage that resource and other resources across the city, including community networks, community anti-hate networks, and other types of initiatives to the United for All initiative that just was launched to bolster the work that the police service is doing, but also those FTEs are doing.
And just ask Deputy Chief Bell to speak to the work that we're doing currently in the structure of the CEC.
So you well know the work we do on CEC as one of the original chairs of it. So what we're doing is we're starting to develop and work with Deputy Chief Jaswell and his EDI team to make sure that there is a development and oversight role for the Community Equity Council to play as we look at developing our EDI strategy and our EDI action plan. Like the Chief said, it's going to take all of us to be committed to it, directed, dedicated to it, and it's going to take our community and our Community Equity Council to actually help develop what we need to do and provide the oversight we need to make sure that we're in the right direction.
Excellent. Well, my feeling is that consultation, coordination, and communication is key. And so with the establishment of this new anti-racism unit at the city, it's my hope that the police service and the city concurrently will take maximal use of this new resource. Thank you.
Were there any questions from any of the members? Thank you very much, Alison. So that concludes the list of delegations. Based on this report, that the Ottawa Police Services Board, 1, approve the 2020 draft operating and capital budgets, and 2, direct the Executive Director to forward the budgets to City Council for approval. Is that, yes?
Just a question. First of all, I'm happy to support the motion and thank the Chief and Jeff and the deputies and all of the staff who work very hard in these documents and work in a very collaborative fashion with the City Treasurer as well. We appreciate that. We received 2 letters from individuals who are not able to attend, and one, Melanie White, we spoke to at committee. The other was on idling, cars idling, and we have this problem in the public sector for some reason. You know, I see City of Ottawa trucks idling all the time, and I often think if that was their car, would they be idling their car for 15, 20 minutes? You know, they were putting up some boards on the Corkstown Bridge. And I know that because of the computer technology and lights and so on, you need to keep the car, but often on paid duty, I'll see a car parked and it's, you know, its lights are on in an intersection. It happened today on Elgin near the construction. Is there not some device that can be purchased where you can power up your computer, but they can turn the car off, not only from a cost savings point of view, but also just the GHGs that are spewed in? This woman, Holly Richer White, said one such study on greenhouse gases showed CO2 emissions 211,000 pounds emitted from a police cruiser Ford model over a 5-year period. Now, she suggests electric vehicles, and I know from a chase and a pursuit option that's not realistic. But is there anything that can be done? Is there some kind of we're buying a lot of vehicles that we can put in some kind of a battery that would keep the lights and the computer running with your ability to turn it off so you don't see smoke coming out of the tailpipe?
Mayor, all good points. I know the vehicle that I was just issued has an idling device in it. First time I've driven a car like that. It kind of freaks me out when I come to a stop sign and all of a sudden it shuts down, but very good for the environment and for fuel consumption. That said, I am going to ask Jeff to speak specifically to what we're doing with some pilot projects and some ability for us to address some, probably not all of what you've raised.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Fleet Department at OPS works very closely with the Fleet Department at the City and has participated in numerous pilot programs over the years. They did participate in an anti-idling pilot project several years ago. Unfortunately, it didn't work very well, resulted in excessive downtime for some of the vehicles. We participate in telematic fueling system partnerships. We're currently looking at a GPS system. They're constantly networking with their peers across the country and across North America, looking at different options. So far, there really isn't anything, especially for this climate, where it's hot in the summer and especially where it's cold in the wintertime, where the equipment inside needs to remain heated. I can say that we have purchased 3 hybrid vehicles that we'll be piloting in 2020 and looking to see if we can save some fuel from that perspective. But I can say that the fleet team does regularly work with their peers, both at the city, but also their police service peers across North America, to come up with the options from a fuel efficiency perspective and a climate and environment perspective.
Thank you. So is that carried? The 2 motions? Thank you. So the next item number 6 is OPS response to diversity audit and traffic stop race-based data collection report. And I believe there's a presentation on this.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Deputy Chief Uday Jaswal and his team to lead the presentation and take any questions that arise.
Cheap shit OPS pen. It only works some of the time.
Good evening. I'm pleased to be here with Inspector Paul Burnett and Manager Laurie Fenton, who will be walking you through a presentation today. Very high-level overview of the 2 reports that we made public last week. But more importantly, what are we doing with the information from those reports in terms of how we're moving forward. I also want to thank Laurie and Paul personally here for their hard work in terms of leading that work and that effort, but also to Director David Snoddy, who's here, and Deputy Chief Steve Bell, and the Community Equity Council for their work around community engagement. So again, we brought the 2 reports to the Community Equity Council on November 18th, 2019, and released the report at the same time to some of our key stakeholders that had informed these 2 reports. We then provided a technical briefing that I was pleased to see most of the board was at on November 20th, and we're now seized with information from the 2 reports, though I must say the information not really surprising in a sense in terms of what the findings were. The purpose and the goals of those reports has always been to, number one, ensure that we're responding quickly and effectively to issues and incidents of racism and discrimination, meaning that we have the tools required to do this and we're prepared to hold ourselves to account. The second is to ensure that the OPS performance and operational systems support equitable outcomes for our community and members. And this is really an organizational and leadership concern. I think the Chief spoke to that well in his opening comments. It's about identifying and correcting underperforming and non-performing systems. So internally, that might be looking at how we're recruiting or how we're promoting and transferring members across the organization. Externally, it's how we're engaging communities and how we're deploying police resources. And when we don't do this well, we see that as unintended consequences, of communities who feel over-policed and underserved. The other byproduct of this is that we place our frontline civilian and sworn members in very difficult positions through no fault of their own and are likely contributing to some of the disproportionalities that we see in the outcomes. So what we're talking about here is actually re-engineering the way that we police, how we gather information, how we use information, how we make decisions, and how we direct our members. And our leadership and our desire to address the unintended impacts of police activity, I think, is leading in Canada and is quite unique in policing. The third is to develop the right metrics and tracking tools to ensure that we're making meaningful progress around EDI and can demonstrate that progress through the validation of an independent third party. So we need to know that we have the right sets of measures to demonstrate that we're operating and policing in a bias-neutral manner, both internally and externally. And I don't know if we understand what that full set of metrics are at this point. We actually need to develop that through the assistance of the Community Equity Council and other stakeholders like the Ontario Human Rights Commission. So is the current format of race-based data collection the right one? Possibly not. Possibly we need to move to another format around how we're collecting race-based data, though I think it needs to remain part of the formula of how we're looking at our performance. And all this is driving towards a equity, diversity, and inclusion action plan, and it's our intention, as the Chief said, to launch that work in January 2020. So with that, I'll ask Laurie and Paul to give you an overview of the 2 reports and how we're making our initial attempts, in our initial activity around developing the EDI plan. Thank you.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to give you guys an update on last week's releases. I will just show our anchor slide, which has really been where we are grounded in this work, and that's with the strategic plan. The goal around to make meaningful progress on EDI, and quite simply for us, that's about creating a police service that both our members and the community deserve. That's been our plain language version of that. So that has guided our work, and there has been lots of great work done. If you've read some of the reports lately from the audit team, from the traffic stop project, there has been quite a lot of work that OPS has done, some of it leadership work, some of it has been, though quite honestly, related to complaints from both our members and from the community. So we don't want to pat ourselves too much on the back when we talk about progress, because there are a lot of reports that have come out with additional recommendations of work that we still need to do. And speaking of reports, let's talk about last week. Two of those reports, ones we've been working on for quite some time that we've been waiting for. First was the second traffic stop race data collection project report. That covered 3 years of traffic stop race-based data, as well as the long-awaited diversity audit report, and that took about a year and a half to complete. All of those reports, as well as the overview presentations from the experts, the people with the PhDs, that's all available online on our website. What we're here to do today, obviously we're not going to do them justice, we're just going to provide a brief overview of those reports and how we plan as a service to move forward with action. As the Chief indicated and our Deputy indicated, and that action is about a coordinated, measured plan, a 3-year EDI action plan. In terms of the traffic stop race data collection report, the second report was released last week. It covered 3 years. Look, we're no longer in completing a settlement agreement with the Human Rights Commission. This is something that has become operational. We're 6 years in. When we started this in 2013, nobody else was doing it. It was the biggest Canadian policing study of race-based data. And since that time, of course, it's come through the province via regulated interactions and also from the Anti-Racism Directorate, new rules coming into play as early as January. So race-based data collection is here to stay. It's also, the costs have gone down quite substantially since the original project began because it is operational. As York pointed out last week, we have over-delivered on the original settlement, and they also pointed out that we've completed the recommendations from the first report that they did for us back in 2016 when it was released. They spoke very highly about the work that we've been doing, not just in addressing racial profiling, but in terms of human rights and organizational change. And while we're very happy for their support and that of the Commission going forward, the findings still show that we have work to do, and so that's what we're going to be focused on. Just in terms of highlights of that, some of the positives around this second report. One of the things York has pointed out is that traffic stops have gone down over 30% in 5 years. They see that as a positive because people are being stopped less, unless, of course, as long as it doesn't lead to increased collisions and that kind of thing, which they've pointed out, obviously. Also, it's important to note that the race is not perceived by our officers prior to the decision to stop the vehicle in 89% of the time for the total stops. That's been consistent since year 1 and all the way through to year 5 and ongoing. We've done ride-alongs with community. There's lots of factors there. Time of day plays a factor. The car's too far away, that kind of thing. That really hasn't been disputed. Some of the positive findings is there's no racial disproportionalities found in the reason for stop. So that 98% of our stops are provincial reasons, HTA, municipal, that kind of thing. So there weren't any disproportionalities found there. As well, there's no evident disproportionate higher incidence in charges for racialized minority drivers in Ottawa when compared to white drivers. Of course, I'm also going to tell you about some of the more negative findings and where we have lots of work to do. So last time, or for the first report, we did have high disproportionate rates of 2 groups in particular, Middle Eastern and Black drivers being stopped more than they should based on their population. Their driving population, that is. And again, that continued with this report. We saw some modest improvements, but again, their percentage points, around 5%. In the larger category, and this is where concerns about racial profiling often culminate, is in young Black youth and young Middle Eastern youth. We did see some really good drops here, 30% drop in the high disproportionate rates for Middle Eastern young males, as well as a 23% drop for young Black males. And those are very good success indicators. However, the rates do remain high and work still needs to be done here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about where do we go from here, and that has been, this time we're not questioning the recommendations or that we have work to do. That's been acknowledged. But one of the things the York team and the Commission have said is that we have implemented many of the best practices in this area around addressing racial profiling concerns, things like training. We have the first racial profiling policy in Canadian policing. We've implemented some of those things, and we've been noted for them. Just last month, for example, the Human Rights Commission launched policy guidelines for law enforcement to address racial profiling for the province. And OPS was recognized in there on a few fronts. One of them was data collection, another one was the gender audit, our workforce census work that we've done, and of course race-based data collection. But having said that, and that we have implemented best practices, where we find ourselves is in uncharted territory. We've been looking at different research. Like I said, we have been implementing it, but we're at a place now where there is additional policy work to do. There are the 7 recommendations from York, but they really speak to the need to do some pilot or experimental work to try to bring these rates down for the communities impacted. So, for example, going beyond data collection and best practices and doing something like a pilot in a neighborhood and using the Community Equity Council and perhaps a task force, as well as some experts around the table that can help us drive down those rates with some new and innovative ideas. That's just a brief overview of race data. I'm going to hand it over to Inspector Burnett to talk about the diversity audit.
Good evening. So I'll speak to you briefly about the diversity audit. That usually came from 2 places. The recommendation from the first traffic stop race data collection, as well as the Coalition for Justice for Mr. Abdi. Here's an overview of what we hired them to do in the last year and a half. Provide us with a comprehensive review and assessment of current state of OPS, quantitative and qualitative with benchmarks and best practices, as well as identification of strengths, weaknesses, and gaps to address in order to achieve diversity goals. And some of the 5 areas that they focused on were leadership and governance, representation of diversity, human resources, policies and procedures, as well as service delivery. The recommendations from this report, along with the traffic stop race data, will help drive the EDI action plan. I'd like to just take a moment to acknowledge a number of contributors, such as various community networks, a variety of stakeholders, OPS subject matter experts, and senior leaders, as well as a number of OPS members that contributed to this diversity report. So what does the report tell us? Last week, the Greybridge Malcolm outlined a number of their key findings. While there are about 97 recommendations overall, they focused on 10 vital recommendations and themed them in 7 areas, including resolute leadership, inclusive hiring, inclusive careers, and climate of openness and high standards, just to name a few. In conclusion of that report, overall they concluded that we have many strengths in traditional policies and programs, but there are gaps in the execution. They scored us at an above average 2.7 out of 5 against the Global Diversity and Inclusion benchmark. The team noted that they saw signs of progress and positive momentum, particularly in last year. They said we need to build on that positive momentum to move forward from reactive to proactive. Last week we announced that we would move forward together and focus on action. In the coming days and weeks, we will work closely with the senior leadership team and the Community Equity Council to create a 3-year EDI action plan that focuses on meaningful progress on EDI. The plan and the change it will bring is as much to help the community as it is to assist our members do their jobs and serve the community in most effective way possible. If this sounds familiar, it should. The Chief has echoed this throughout his brief tenure here. The action plan will be an organizational strategy with focused activities and definable deliverables. Although based on significant foundational work from OLT and other sources, including OPS project work, research, gender, traffic stop race data, and the census, it will include progress reporting and benchmark measures that will also report to the board as well as CEC. Communication and change management plan, which will include implementation and the need for EDI leadership, coaching and mentoring for all senior leadership team. The governance structure that sees the input from the Community Equity Council. And last but not least, a creation of the plan will not be done in isolation. It will be a multi-stakeholder approach. Both internal and external stakeholders will be involved in drafting the plan. Here you can see the beginning of the draft framework for the EDI action plan. It will focus on key areas such as total engaged community. I don't particularly like that. I think total community engagement is probably a better phrase there. Diversity workforce, diverse competent members, just to name a few of those. These pillars align quite well with the recommendations put forward from the diversity audit as well as the traffic stop race data. If the model looks like a house, that's because we've heard the community. We need to fix our house before we can go into the community and fix theirs. In terms of next steps, focus on dialogue and moving forward together, a collective action. Set goals and prioritize the recommendations that have been put forward. Internal and external stakeholder engagement, meetings, seeking input and advice, and recent reports and the recommendations put forward. And last, of course, the release of the draft plan by January 31st, 2020. In closing, we have a great opportunity in the coming weeks. We'll have the Human Rights Learning Forum, where we can help build the EDI action plan. We encourage board members, members of the community to register and help us assist and move this thing forward. Closing remarks there.
Happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, and we really appreciate it. You have done some amazing work here. I think, as you've said, we all acknowledge that these are first steps, and there's much more to be done yet. And I think I speak on behalf of all the board members when I say we are really completely committed to supporting you in this initiative. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Member Valiquet. You have a question?
This is very exciting. Thank you very much. We've been waiting for this for quite some time now, and the results, it looks positive going forward. My question relates specifically to recruits. I think recruits are probably the most vulnerable of our members, and I think it's really important that if we are going to fix the house, as you mentioned, that's probably one of the key areas to focus on. I'm not sure that there's an opportunity for our recruits. We talked about this at the meeting in September. I'm wondering what is available, how do we support our recruits when they have an issue, they have a problem, they don't know who to go to. I understand that there's a new, I'm not sure if this is new or not, but I've heard of the Employee Resource Group. I've heard it's a very positive experience for those racialized members to be able to express what's going on in their daily lives if they do have some issues that they want to bring up. So I'm wondering if you can speak to us a little bit about that particular group and what it does and how you hope to take it forward. And I'd also be interested in knowing what the expectations, role, and responsibilities are of the Employee Resource Group, who sponsors them, who are they accountable to? Thank you.
Thanks for your question. All excellent questions. So we've had obviously informal networks in terms of women, racialized members, LGBTQ members within our organization for some time. We're in the process right now of formalizing those groups. In fact, the chief just met with our employee resource groups last week, the leads of those employee resource groups, and heard direct feedback from members around what's working, what isn't working, and how we might move forward. In fact, and I appreciate Director Snoddy's come to the table here as well. He's really leading that effort internally to formalize ERGs. The issue around recruits and the support that are provided to recruits was actually discussed at that meeting, so the question's quite timely. Understanding that it is a very vulnerable and challenging time for many recruits, especially if they are racialized, especially if they're women or belong to a diverse community. And so we are looking at opportunities to partner with Superintendent Hartley's team at the Professional Development Center to better support recruits as they come in the door, to make them aware of what the internal support systems are that can support them, and have a community of practice, a network of peers that they can lean on and turn to as required. I don't know if Director Snoddy, you want to speak, or the Chief wants to speak to that.
Thanks, Deputy. Chair, thanks for the question, Member Valiquette. Employee resource groups, and sometimes known as internal support networks, are a proven better practice in most organizations that are leading the way in EDI work. They provide an opportunity for the organization to leverage the assets that people bring to their jobs each and every day through multiple identity markers. And we've had that informally within the organization, and we've sought to make it more formal through employee resource groups and bringing visibility to that. And the current approach that we're using is there are a few folks that have agreed to lead that work in the groups that have been networking informally, so women, racialized, and our LGBTQ members. And each of them has a superintendent sponsor, either an inspector or superintendent sponsor that they have access to help navigate corporate barriers that might exist. I want to stress that it's a courageous move by any organization, but in particular the individuals who have said, yes, I want to be a part of this, because often it's questioned as to why do we need this, or it can be divisive, when really what we're doing is looking to help provide an equitable opportunity for people who have otherwise been underrepresented, whose voices haven't necessarily been able to come clearly to the forefront, to have that voice, to be visible, to get the support they need, and most importantly, to help foster an environment that keeps people that we've worked really hard to get into our organizations, to help see them succeed in their career progression through advancement and promotion, and to act as advisors to the organization on policy, practices, and decision-making that's through a lens that the organization may not otherwise see if they weren't able to tap into those groups. So we're excited about this. It's very new for us, and I'll highlight it's a recommendation in the diversity audit that we invest in employee resource groups as an approach.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yes, Member Nerman.
Thanks for the nice presentation. And I was going through the OPS diversity, which focus on representation of diversity and human resources. So I have a directed question to DC Jaswal and the Chief. Is there a specified program in place in the OPS for promotions within the ranks for members of visible minority and racialized communities? Are there gaps? If yes, what steps being taken to correct that?
So thanks for your question. I think going back to my earlier comments about looking at systems and making sure that our systems are providing equitable outcomes for all our members. So it's very important that when we think about promotion and transfer policies, that we're thinking about every member, including white males. And that every member has an opportunity to fully participate, be their authentic selves at work, and to be successful in this organization. So I think part of the work that we want to engage in around taking the findings of the diversity audit into the EDI action plan is making sure that we have the right indicators and the ability to monitor those systems, including transfer and promotion, to make sure that the outcomes are equitable for all individuals within the organization. So we don't necessarily want to, we don't want to single out any particular group, but we want to make sure that we're providing the right supports and resources for the members who may need it to make sure that their outcomes are equitable.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions from board members? No. Well, I really appreciate that. We have a public delegation, and I'm not sure if yeah, there's a space up here. If you'd like to come up and join us, then maybe you can stay at your seats until he's finished in case there's any questions that you wish to speak to.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you for accepting my request to make a presentation. What I'm going to say is based on notes I took at the presentation of the two reports last week. It doesn't have anything to do with the presentation we just got. And I know that on December 4, we'll have another kick at the can. I speak today as a citizen of Ottawa, as a member of Black Agenda Noir, and on my own behalf. I'm speaking because, as a citizen of Ottawa who knows a bit about the history of police-community relations, I do not want the OPS to continue barking up the wrong trees or shunting itself off on a sidetrack that eventually comes right back at us because of its circular nature. Last week, we received two reports of studies ordered by the OPS. One was the traffic race data survey, and the other one, an audit of diversity in the OPS. Both reports involved a number of PhDs, 5 of them in all, I think. Both reports involved a significant amount of taxpayer dollars out of the OPS budget. Both reports were very well presented. One of them even had 97 recommendations. Both were instigated by complaints from Black people. And yet, neither report really served to advance us much further. Indeed, the presenter of the traffic stops report seemed to suggest that a further report might be needed. And the diversity audit, which proclaimed itself as a methodical evaluation and review, did not seem to begin where an audit should begin. It did not appear to think that there was need for a clear baseline statement on the numerical facts of diversity of the OPS, including the various kinds of diversity and at which levels they existed. Those metrics I have not seen. They may be in there, but I have not seen them. I volunteered many hours with both OPS members and the PhDs as they prepared for this audit. I believe the PhDs might not have received a clear statement of what was wanted, what were the deliverables. The OPS seemed to know it wanted a report on diversity, but it did not seem to know what that meant or what the service was trying to achieve in getting such an audit, or why, or if it was really needed. All the blame does not go to them, however. We live in a country that is afraid to speak the truth about racism, a country where we shy away from acknowledging color discrimination or color prejudice. And so we hide our narratives and policies and investigations in softer words and terms. We don't like to talk about Black issues. We talk about racial issues. We talk about multiculturalism. We talk about diversity. And the reason for all this talk in the OPS now is that the OPS has been involved in several unnecessary traffic stops of Black and Middle Eastern drivers. Note, this is an issue of color, not race, and that is what the report should have been focused on, color, not race. At least one of those ended in unknown legal expenses, another with a payment of $15,000, and a payment of an undisclosed amount of money because of an assault of a young woman walking home early one morning, as well as the violent deaths of Abdurrahman Abdi and Vincent Gardner and Wayne Johnson by police or in police custody, and the shooting by police of Francis Nichols while he was in his bed. None of these things had to do with race. They all had to do with color. These were all Black people. If you plant peas, you cannot expect to reap corn. It is the position of myself and Black Agenda Noir that we must state clearly what it is we are trying to achieve. The chief has already made clear his task, and we are here to say we support his goals of advancing community policing, making meaningful progress on equity, diversity, and inclusion, supporting OPS members, and modernizing the work environment. But we don't want to see any further expenditures that are misdirected and end up where we plant peas but reap corn. At best, that is a waste of time and financial resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of our delegation? No. Perhaps, Chief, you would like to respond?
Just briefly again, we're grateful for all inputs. There is a wisdom and a fierce focus by Mr. Ewart Waters, and I'm grateful for that. It's noted, and we will do our very best to meet all the expectations. And appreciate, even as you were presenting, Director Snoddy acknowledged the difference in terms of definition, and race and color has a small but significant differentiation, and it's noted, and we will make sure that that is reflected in not just the action plan, but the implementation therein. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Norman, I understand you have a motion to present on this item.
Thank you, Acting Chair Smallwood. My motion reads as follows. Whereas the Ottawa Police Services Board and the Police Service, Ottawa Police Service, have a demonstrated commitment to promoting the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in continuing to build a workforce that is reflective of all of the communities and neighborhoods it serves. And whereas Ottawa Police Service conducts recruitments for new members not only from our community but also nationally, and whereas it's important for applicants from all communities to understand that building a diverse workforce is one of our priorities, and that the Ottawa Police Service welcomes recruits and officers from diverse faiths and backgrounds. Therefore, be it resolved that the Ottawa Police Services Board directs the Ottawa Police Service to ensure that all of its recruitment strategies and advertisements, whether local or national, affirm that the Ottawa Police Service is a progressive employer that believes in, promotes, and demonstrates the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a priority, and that it welcomes recruit and officers from diverse faiths and backgrounds and accommodates differences by policy and practice, including religious symbols.
Thank you very much, Member Norman. Is the report received and the motion carried? And Member Norman, I think you wanted to have a comment.
Thank you again. I will be very brief. I thank Acting Chair Smallwood, Mayor Watson, and fellow board members in supporting this motion unanimously to move it forward. As a board, We have long called for a more representative police service for our community, and this is therefore an important statement for us to make. I believe we must throw the door wide open and welcome diversity and champion inclusion. This motion, I believe, is in line with the values of Ottawa Police Service, and while I appreciate that it will largely be symbolic, it will support our public statements around outreach and recruitment and a direction to the OPS to make tangible progress in this area. I can say with conviction that this statement will resonate with our community as a whole, and especially with our racialized and diverse communities who want to see us address issues of bias and discrimination in an open and transparent way. A resolution of this nature will reassure the community that we take these issues seriously as a board and that we are committed to delivering them as a police service that serves all residents in a fair and equitable manner. I also wish to place on record and convey my sincere gratitude to our various community leaders across Ottawa. Few of them are present here: Chief Slowly, DC Jaswal, and our Executive Director, Ms. Ferrero, for their feedback and support on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Nerman. I'm now going to look for a motion that the Ottawa Police Services Board adjourn the public portion of its meeting to move in camera to discuss confidential items pertaining to legal and personnel matters in accordance with Section 35(4)(b) of the Police Services Act. Is that? These items will include a labor relations matter, a modernization roadmap update, a personnel matter involving a named individual, and a legal indemnification issue. Thank you very much for attending. Congratulations.